Alright, 7.06 has come out, and we're going to do sort of a first impressions. I always try and make these fast because I feel like if you end up quibbling over some of the small things in the patch, you kind of lose sight of what the important changes are. Whether or not this level 20 or level 25 talent that you may or may not get at all in the game, or you may or may not choose, has a massive impact in how you play your hero is not really what we're looking for in patch analysis, right? We're looking at overall game changes and hero plus or minuses, right? Whether or not this hero becomes viable again or doesn't, or whether with the changes this hero is more suited towards the meta, and then with the buffs that it got, it also makes it even more powerful. Those are the sort of things that we want to look for out of a patch analysis. So it's still going to be a little bit of first impressions. I glanced over it while I was falling half asleep this morning, so yeah, we'll see how fast it goes. All right, we're going to start with the deny mechanics as well as the shrines in the laning phase and how this all kind of couples together. I think these changes mostly affect the mid and the off lane the most. So between you being able to creep denies now grant the denying team 30% of the XP bounty, on top of the fact that there is an extra melee creep in the mid lane, as well as no shrines available for the first 5 minutes, it means that we are going to see probably a lot more lane dominators, possibly more dual lanes because of this. Particularly the off lane is going to be affected by offlaners that are more laning phase focused, that are able to get safer farm, like your Clockworks and Earthshakers may be coming back into the meta. I saw a slight buff to Elder Titan. You never know when that guy's going to be coming back in as well. Those kind of offlaners I think are going to be more prevalent than your Abaddons, Legion Commanders, those kind of heroes, that Magnus, those kind of heroes that came into lane and were able to take advantage of the constant shrine usage. You know, they would just go into lane, and that very first level, they would just spam out their abilities, and they would be pretty aggressive, and they would kind of fight, and then they would just make use of their shrine, come back at 100% HP, and these laning phase supports couldn't really do enough to compete. Like, there's not enough regeneration in the world for you to be able to beat out these offlaners. So we're probably going to see, with the combination of this denies now granting the denying team 30% the XP bounty, a lot more focus on laning phase supports that are looking to zone offlaners, harass mid laners, and secure more denies for their team, as well as prevent the enemy team from denying. There is a lot larger swing when lanes are hugely in one favor to a team. There's a much larger swing, there's a much larger gain for the team that is able to dominate their lane because of this experience bounty they're able to pick up. It means that not only are you gimping that offlaner, or you're establishing dominance over that enemy mid, not only are you denying his experience, but you're also buffing up your own. So you could easily see safe laners who are sitting at level 5 when the offlaner is sitting at level 3. And again, this comes back down to the fact that if you have these laning phase supports who are able to be a lot more effective because they don't have to worry about this shrine usage for the first 5 minutes, then they feel a lot more value out of sitting in lane and actually disrupting the offlaner, rather than just knowing that everything that they do is going to be undone by a single shrine usage, and then they're going to be under-leveled compared to the offlaner. Now there's a lot more value, because if you set that tempo from the get-go and you say, you're not getting any experience, and my safe laner is able to secure these denies and these last hits, then he is very rapidly going to gain an experience advantage, like a 1 or 2 level advantage over you, and then I feel a lot more value out of my impact from the laning phase. So these heroes like Crystal Maiden, for example, who go around and play off jungle for like the first 3 minutes, 4 minutes, it's like that was an impact because these offlaners were able to get secured farm every single time. So you wanted supports that were able to have an impact, have some sort of extra impact in the economy of the game for the laning phase. Mid lane is something else. We're going to have an extra melee creep in the mid lane. That's why I talked about dual lanes. Ice Frog wanted to implement a change that I think wanted to put in an extra range creep a number of patches ago into the mid lane. I think this is, with the extra melee creep, I think will still have a similar impact to what I kind of theory crafted about the extra creeps, is that these extra creeps are just more value for dual lanes in the mid, because there's more experience to be shared, and because denies are more important, and because the laning phase, you know, it's so important to be dominant in your laning phase in order to get these denies and get that extra creep and all that sort of thing, that there is more value to having some of these mid supports like the Ogre, who comes in and just ignites and runs at heroes, or maybe Lich is going to be making his comeback because of the deny mechanics that are going on and a slight buff there. Those kind of heroes could see a lot more, because there is more to be gained from the mid lane. Then naturally you're not just going to leave these heroes in a 1v1, right? Because the mid lane is more important than it's maybe ever been. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how this is going to play out, but because this mid lane has more value to it because of this extra creep, then there's more incentive for you to make sure that you do have an advantage, and bringing the extra supports into the mid lane just kind of follows that line of logic. Other than that, the other things here, not any real massive changes. I think the 5-minute shrine, the getting deny experience, as well as the extra creep for the first 15 minutes, all are the big changes that should be focused on. The other biggest one to the overall game change is that now we have neutrals spawning every minute instead of every 2 minutes. It comes with a 20% nerf on experience and gold gained from the neutrals. So killing neutrals is not as valuable in the moment, but stacking neutrals is a whole lot easier, because now you've got it every single minute, and there's going to be a whole lot more value out of clearing through those stacks, even with the 20% nerf there. They also have an increase of 2% every 7.5 minutes, so it kind of helps, you know, get back that 20% later on into the game. What this means is you were watching a lot of the pro meta, and when teams needed to play safe, they would play off of their off-lane jungle or some of their safe lane jungle areas that are closer to the mid lane, and they would play off of these areas and they would farm them, and then they wouldn't have anything to do for 2 minutes. So, you know, they would kind of maybe push out and try to secure themselves at least one lane's worth of farm or something like that. Now we have this reliable, every minute you're going to have some farm to be able to take advantage of. I think that this means that these greedier teams are going to be able to take a lot better advantage of it. Any sort of junglers will have a much better time when it comes to their first 10 minutes of the game. They have a lot more options, particularly Chen and Enchantress are going to have a lot more options, because there was already more camps for them to operate off of, and now those camps are refreshed every minute once you clear through it. That means that Enchantress and Chen have a lot more consistent impact. There was already, you know, I was watching these Enchantresses, and I think Enchantress was actually a hero that fit the meta relatively well, and I thought if we kept the same patch that we would see this hero really make her comeuppance. But now with being, you know, every single minute, and knowing that, say you start off in the off lane jungle and you pick up your one creep, and then you move into the enemy safe lane, you pick up your another creep, and you invade the enemy jungle. If you clear through the smaller creeps there, that you know that after that rotation you have a camps to be able to fall back on. And so I think that brings a lot more consistency to the impact of Chen and Enchantress, and perhaps more than we've ever seen, simply because there are more camps to operate on. And now that they've gone back to a minute respawn time, then you can always feel comfortable just kind of farming the jungle sometimes, just to be able to get some better creeps. Overall, I think this change does put a lot more value back into Iron Talons, maybe for offlaners as well. Offlaners that are feeling the impact of these laning phase supports may have to go back into jungle at times. I foresee dual lanes maybe being a little bit more of the meta choices for the off lane, but it's entirely likely that the dual lanes fall into the mid lane instead. and we actually have the offlane forced to take some jungle farm at a time. You know, take advantage of his offlane jungle because there's that a camp every single minute, so you can just kind of bounce back and forth between the two. Other changes to that, again, just greedier lineups are always going to be more favorable. There's just a lot more farm on the map to be taken advantage of with these neutrals. If you play safe, if you protect your outer towers, particularly your side lane tier 2s and your mid tier 1, there's a lot more value, I think, out of protecting those towers because they in effect, as a zone, protect very a lot of these neutral camp areas. And since we're seeing more value out of them, then why not? We do have a siege creep buff, which is pretty interesting. Siege creeps have long been kind of looked at as like, oh, it's like the cherry on top when you're going for a push. You're like, oh, we've got a siege creep. Like, you would sometimes hear about, oh, like rotating, you know, doing for a smoke gank when the siege creep is coming. You know, you do a smoke wrap around on the offlaner or something like that, kill him, and take advantage of the fact you have a siege creep to push down the offlane tower. Now there will be a lot more strategy focused on that for the laning phase. So instead of every 7th wave, it's every 10th wave, which just means every 5 minutes. The siege creep is a lot tankier and does a lot more damage. Goes from 150 to 250% versus structures. So you're going to see a lot more strategies focused around making something happen on that siege creep wave. Because again, being able to push down these towers and take more map control nets you a lot more powerful impact against the enemy team, because you're taking away these jungle camps that are spawning every minute. So being able to take map control, I think, has become a lot more important, as well as the chain to the shrines also being changed from 5 to 3 when it comes to base defense. Now there's only 3 shrines that you can work off of, and each of them are just behind the barracks. So high ground pushes just became a whole lot easier. They're still not, you know, as easy as back in like the TI4 meta or anything like that. But again, it does lead into a little bit more of a pushing meta, right? Where establishing early towers gets you more map control, limits the amount of creeps the enemy can work off of, and then in turn turns into a high ground push when you're ready. That also sets into Roshan actually having cheese on the second death. I don't know where Roshan is, but that again comes into it, right? There's a very big power spike now for the second Roshan. The first Aegis is already good enough to establish tempo control. The second Aegis can now be, like, the second Aegis is already where you would consider pushing high ground for some pushing lineups. Now that is sort of cemented with a cheese being available as well. It's like a second life for a second ally. So now you've got 2 allies that are able to go into high ground, have basically the second life available to you, especially if you have some sort of saving hero for the cheese person, so he doesn't just get bursted down. A lot of value out of that second Roshan and for these timing pushes. With the change of the shrines, it seems like IceFrog still wants to keep heroes very ready to fight. There's this very weird all hero strength growth increased by 0.3, followed with a increase in the regeneration gained from having strength, so from 0.03 HP to 0.06. Does seem like IceFrog wants to see a little bit more value out of the strength points into regen and being able to make sure that heroes are always kind of ready to fight. We also see that out of some of the item changes, a lot more items incorporating Ring of Healths into their recipes. I believe Force Staff is one of them, and Ether Lens is another one, just to kind of piggyback on this idea that, and I think that's what he wanted out of the shrines, was to make sure that shrines allowed us to always be ready to go and fight things, and it just made the game a little bit more action-packed. When you win a team fight, you can back off to your shrine, use it, and then go again, and I think that was a cool idea to Dota that made it a little bit more fast-paced in some regards, but it did slow down the game in other regards with in regard to the high ground shrines and how hard it was to go. We had some economy changes. I looked over these. I don't think they're overly massive. there's less gold to be gained from actually taking these objectives, but I still think that the overall what you are gaining from these objectives and the map control presented kind of makes up for that. 275, 225 to 225, 150. You could see the kind of changes, right? It's like, okay, it's just a bit of a bump downwards for almost every single one of these bigger game objectives. Raxes, Roshan, Shrines, tier 3s, tier 4s, all that sort of thing. So there's less value out of gaining the objectives, but again, I still think that there is still going to be more gained from, not more, but it'll kind of make up for the loss of gold. The immediate gold that you gain from being able to take that tower bounty, that's been lessened, but perhaps the control of the map is going to be more important, which may lead us to more vision heroes. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Specifically, there have been some vision heroes that got some decent buffs. And vision is the best way, besides taking objectives, to be able to obtain map control and be able to play greedy on your side and be able to limit the enemy team from playing greedy and spreading out and farming. Illusions got some pretty big hits. I think that Illusions, honestly, I was a little bit surprised that Illusions didn't receive these nerfs before. There's more bounty to be gained from Illusions, so maybe at level 2, it's actually less, but at level 20, you get a lot more gold out of killing an Illusion than you used to. Those Illusions also illusion building damage reduction from 50% to 60%. I think overall it's like these illusions combined with the fact that they're dealing with less damage with radiance helps balance out the fact that we had this tower aura, and these illusions from like Terrorblade and Naga Siren and even Alchemist, they're able to do a lot more damage in the towers than they used to because of the fact that we had a decrease in the armor, but was supposed to be kind of counteracted by the armor aura. So when you went for these 5-band pushes, the tower got a lot tankier than it used to. But when only one hero, or maybe no heroes, was pushing the tower and kind of chipping down on it, it was a lot more impactful. So those heroes like non-illusion heroes, say Lina, for example, was a great example of a hero that I was able to dominate its lane and chip away at the tower, that mid tower, very quickly because of this, little bit of a change up in how the armor works for the towers. So illusions kind of got hit there as well. I don't think there was anything else that was dramatically different of these changes. Buyback cooldown increased from 7 minutes to 8 minutes. Again, I think that's more of a high ground change. There's more incentive to going high ground because there's only one shrine to work off of per lane, and then you add on to the fact that if you are forcing a buyback, it is more impactful than it used to be. Even just a couple of patches ago, we were looking at 6-minute buybacks. Now we're looking at 8. It's a huge difference. That you force one buyback with an Aegis that you have, and it could very well be that you actually control the game well enough that secures you the next Roshan as well. You never know, right? If you're on the tail end of your Aegis timer by going high ground and forcing a buyback, and that in turn, the next Roshan is like an early Roshan spawn time, and they're operating with no buyback, like that could force them into a game-ending play, where they feel like, oh, we have to defend Roshan, but we're operating without a buyback, or they just give up Roshan entirely and play for high ground defense. Either way, there's a big win for you to be found by forcing things, forcing the shrine to be used, forcing these buybacks to be used. There's a lot more incentive to do so, even if the tower bounty has decreased, and the amount of gold that you get for actually completing the objective is lessened. The attempt itself can be worth quite a lot. Respawn talents were taken out of the game. We'll talk about that hero by hero. I'm trying to think of how many of these items I really want to go through. There were some changes. We talked about Ether Lens working in, what was it, a Void Stone, not a Ring of Health. Again, working in a little bit more regeneration into these items. Nothing from these items is very dramatic. Dagon's Kill Illusions is kind of a cool little thing. Four staff working in the, instead of a ring of regen, ring of health, same price. And that in turn affects Hurricane Pike. Midas, a little bit of twerk. I thought this was going to happen. I thought the gold gained from the hand of Midas was a little bit too much, so I was not at all surprised to see that Ice Frog just, you know, he was too experience heavy before. It was a little bit too gold heavy afterwards. Now he's just trying to tweak it out a little bit, make the experience a little bit more than it was from the last buff, and the gold reduced slightly. Still think that it's probably valuable to pick up, just not quite. We're not going to see 4 Midases per team. We may see more Midases on certain heroes, particularly some scaling supports or offlaners, or maybe even safe laners. Pick up this hand of Midas. So we may see it more often from those heroes, but we won't see like, oh, I've got 1550 gold, might as well get a Midas, because why the hell not, you know? A little bit of a heart buff. Halberd. They've been sneakily buffing Halberd. It is going to get to a point. It's that creep, that power creep that items or heroes receive that eventually becomes strong enough that it becomes a thing again. If you nerf down the power of Solar Crest, which they did, that in turn gives more viability to picking up a Heaven's Halberd instead, because Heaven's Halberd just got replaced by Solar Crest. Like nobody wanted Heaven's Halberd when you could get a Solar Crest instead. So in that case, Heaven's Halberd now having can no longer be dispelled by spell immunity. So now when you put this disarm on somebody, it's pretty much permanent. You can't dispel it. You can't manta it off. You can't BKB it off. Anything like that. A lot more powerful as an active. Still has a lot of value as a stat item. It's just, again, the fact that there was just items that were better in it. Ring of Health instead of a recipe. There was a weird Mask of Madness change. Provides plus 20 damage and plus 10 attack speed because you use a quarterstaff instead of a recipe. And the Berserk active attack speed bonus reduced from 120 to 110, which is very minor considering you're already making up for the 10 attack speed there. So you're just getting an extra 20 damage out of this Mask of Madness. I think that this item has been overlooked for quite some time now. You have to remember that Mask of Madness no longer is a damage amplification, but rather just a minus armor. So it does have a lot of value for meta heroes, particularly if they're not facing up against a whole lot of physical damage. The problem was in the previous meta, we had probably 80% of lineups was physical damage focused. A lot of Templar Assassins. We saw Bristleback coming into the meta. Ursa, Lifestealer. Lycan was coming in. Lycan's probably still going to be here, actually. Lycan is a big buff for this patch, particularly with some pushing buffs. So because of the physical damage, it was kind of like, you know, Mask of Madness didn't quite have the same value, but you will see eventually this item have a big peak. Perhaps after this little bit of a buff. Oh, the Solar Crest. So the armor reduced 12 to 10. Not massive, but I think the big one here is the right kind of change, is that Solar Crest on enemies changed from 25% mischance on target to 25% true strike chance for attackers. So what this means is that you can no longer have a Solar Crest on one hero and a Solar Crest on another hero and use that Solar Crest on the enemy hero that's attacking the other guy. So you can't have a 25% mischance applied on that guy, and that guy just having, you know, a Timber Saw or a Troll or something having this value Solar Crest or whatever, and being able to just have that as a stat item. It's not as effective in being able to protect that hero. There's a lot more, because you could just throw this Solar Crest around. If you were one of these heroes, you could just throw the Solar Crest onto an Ursa, because instead of because you took away your 25% mischance, but you applied a 25% or 25% evasion, but you applied a 25% mischance on that hero. So it was effectively the same for that one hero. So there was a lot less impact in using your Solar Crest as an offensive tool onto allies. You weren't nearly as punished because of this 25% mischance. This 25% true strike for attackers changes that. And now you have to be a lot more careful with your Solar Crest usage. And I do think that this will be a enough of a nerf. It's not a huge nerf, but it's enough of a nerf that we won't see these multiple Solar Crests for every single game. It could still happen. It is still a value item. It's still 10 armor. It's still 25% mischance. And there's still probably going to be a bit of a focus on physical damage. But there is at least a lot more impact when you use this item offensively and you get turned around on. Moonshard, Necronomicon, slight buff, Radiance damage on illusions from 40 to 35. I like that change quite a lot. Rod of Atos, they got a little bit of workaround. Still trying to fit Rod of Atos, much like Heaven's Halberd, into the meta. It's getting this power creep. It's the same thing here. Now, instead of a Vitality Booster, it's 1 Staff of Wizardry and 2 Bracers, which is a lot easier to build for many supports. And in turn does give you a nice little buff up. I think it's like you're building like the double bracers for some of these supports. You could build double bracers now, knowing that you're going into a Rod of Atos, and it just makes your impact in the game a lot more natural. You know, you're as a support, you're working off of little gold in the first place. So every single death, you could buy, you know, another bracer or even just parts of a bracer, working into a Rod of Atos if it is still a valuable item for that game. That's still the heart of the problem, is that many things like Force Staff, Glimmer Capes, even Solar Crest, which is still going to be a valuable item for sure, is whether or not this ensnare of Rod of Atos from range from a support or maybe some sort of utility core is worth more than these other items. This is a little bit of buff up, and it does help. I'm still not convinced that it will be better than some of the other utility items that are currently in the game. But I do like the workaround. I think it does put ourselves in a little bit more focus on this being a support utility item rather than this being like an OD item or a Necrophos item that would just kind of failed constantly. It just, none of those heroes ever picked up that item. Minor changes all around. You shouldn't really ever get sucked into 100 gold or 200 gold change. I don't think it really... Oh, this was another one, right? It uses... we are now using Mango and Infused Raindrop for recipes. I'm guessing if your Infused Raindrop has 1 charge, it doesn't really matter, and you can just turn that into an urn. That's a lot of value for many offlaners who focus on survivability for the laning phase, and an early pickup of the Infused Raindrops helps out quite a bit. And then if that in turn can build into my Urn of Shadows, say on a Nyx Assassin, then hey, I'm all for it. You know, it makes it a little bit easier for me to choose to build into that item instead of Hand of Midas early. Then fantastic, that works for me. Unstable Concoction, that's right. There's this... You can never really tell how Alchemist is going to be affected when you look at some of these changes and you analyze them from just the stat changes and stuff, and you say, oh, now the hero's dead, or oh, this hero's so OP, or something like that. Like, look how much gold he can gain. It's hard to tell because while we did have some changes with Grievel's Greed, we're still going to have more neutral camps to be able to work off of, which is still to Alchemist's favor. And again, being able to play defensive and play around your mid, which is what Alchemist probably does quite well. Still valuable. Hard to tell exactly where Alchemist is going to be affected by these slight changes with Grievel's Greed. Well, we'll see. Small little things, Ancient Apparition. It's like those small little buffs. It's just the small little feel-good thing, but doesn't actually change the hero, you know? Like, oh, Ice Vortex movement modifier has a positive effect on Ancient Apparition. Like, oh, that's great if I'm on top of my Ice Vortex. Otherwise, it doesn't change anything. The hero's still a walking Ice Blast. So, you know, you get enough of these changes and maybe a hero actually becomes viable again. But the only thing that's why I skip over most of these changes. Most of these changes aren't actually going to affect the hero as much as maybe you would think. What is going to affect the pick rate of some of these heroes and how powerful they are in the meta is whether or not the meta focuses on allowing a hero like that to work, right? These pushing heroes, you can give them some buffs if you want to, but ultimately, if pushing isn't the meta, if you don't get a whole lot out of pushing, if you can't end the game by 35 minutes and going high ground because there's too many shrines to fight against or something like that, then pushing just won't work for you. You can't go for a pushing lineup no matter how many times it gets buffed if it's too hard to actually push. So same kind of thing for Ancient Apparition. This ultimate, if Ice Blast sees a lot of value in a game, then the hero can be picked. Otherwise, you can buff up some of the other abilities slightly, but it won't really change anything. We're passing Ganim Scepters around. I'm not going to theorycraft too much. I think most of the Ganim Scepters are kind of like, oh, that's kind of cool, but none of them are going to be like, oh, that's core. You know, because some of them are on supports, or some of them are on heroes that have other core items that are more important. Like Axe could be an item after Blink Dagger, Blade Mail. Maybe you get some sort of armor item after that, and then you get the Ganim Scepter for the damage output. Maybe you get it after Blade Mail, but we'll have to see. There's a Medusa one as well. Maybe Medusa gets an Ags early or something like that. So this one is total damage output reduced by 30% when you apply Battle Hunger, and it applies Battle Hunger on enemy heroes within a 700 AoE after a successful Culling Blade. So damage output reduction is really good for Axe because he still wants you to attack him, but he doesn't want to take a whole lot of damage for it. He still wants to be able to get the Blade Mail damage back into you. That's going to be a little bit affected, but he, more importantly, wants you to attack him and spin. It's why armor is so valuable on Axe and why his call is so good, is that he increases his armor by such a dramatic amount that he's taking very little damage, but he's popping his Blade Mail and he's spinning and stuff, and he's applying all this damage into you, and it's not affected by how much armor he has, the damage that's returned. So there's another one. Ganim Scepter causes Brain Sap to have a 1.5 second cooldown. Looks really cool, but are you going to make a 4-position Bane and bank on him getting to having an Ganim Scepter and getting to level 25? I don't think so. The hero, you pick up Bane for the control and the laning phase dominance. So maybe you pick it up because Brain Sap is such a powerful laning phase ability and allows you to bully almost any other hero in the game. And the Ganim Scepter is like the cherry on top. Like, oh, cool, now I can go an Ganim Scepter if I wanted to. Wild Axe's little buffs, Blood Right buff. This one I actually remember thinking, like, the power creep on Brewmaster is getting more and more and more. Little bit of cast point and reduction for Drunken Haze is kind of nice. The 230% Drunken Brawler crit, it's pretty big. Feels like this hero, considering he is such a team fighter, could be coming back into the meta, maybe as a mid, maybe as an offlaner, but it's hard to say with the dramatic changes to the to how the laning phase works for both of those lanes. So we had many of these respawn talents. Any of the cores got a buff for the most part because they now have a talent that is better for them than the respawn talent. So like, say I would only go, maybe Legion Commander has one, and I would only go the Death Timer one for like 30% of games. You know, if I was really pressed to defend and we were losing the game and we were playing high ground defense, but we still had better late game, then I would get Death Timer. But most of these cores will see a lot of value out of having a different talent than the respawn talent, because oftentimes the respawn talents on these cores were not effective enough. Obviously, it's more of a nerf for, say, Lina or Lion or some of these more early to mid-game heroes that were really able to take advantage of what was percentage-wise a very large reduction in your Death Timer. Power creep on Chaos Knight. power creep, power creep, power creep. It is a pushing hero, so, and it is a lane dominator to certain extents, so we could see it. Chaos Knight was really harmed by the fact that people have shrines to work off of, so if you win on a hero and you didn't successfully kill it, it would go back to the shrine, build full HP, full mana, and you were operating on no mana, because your one combination kills your whole entire mana pool. So you're forced to play with mangoes and stuff, and it just didn't feel right. A lot more impact for the Chaos Knight when he doesn't kill somebody, but brings them very low now because of the lack of shrines. So combination of things may see this hero come back into the meta. Chen for sure back into the meta, I think. A respawn talent. I don't normally talk about level 20 talents because I think they're too late into the game to really have a big impact, but I think this plus 1,000 creep health is decently significant. Gives Chen, because Chen's never really had too much of a problem with early to mid game. It's just the late game power, and we're seeing more and more of that with being able to get the ancient creeps thanks to the ags, and now plus 1,000 creep health on top of that for the ancient creeps. Then you add into the fact that maybe pushing is a little bit more in the meta, and the jungle camps are coming back every minute, etc., etc. It's like all these things kind of stack up on top of each other, that you can see this hero back into play. Death Pact duration increased from 35 to 65. That is, it's different, right? Because we have this cooldown now at 85 seconds, but it lasts for 65 seconds. So before, Clinks was kind of like an alchemist, where if you had some sort of invis hero and you just found the Clinks when Death Pact was about to wear off, go kill him. Now it lasts a lot longer. It still has that 20-second downtime. I feel like this is a buff to Clinks because it allows him to be able to, despite the fact that it means it can't eat as many creeps, it means that he will have a more consistent impact. 35 seconds wasn't a whole lot to work off of. You know, you would go into the jungle, you would eat a creep, you would go into the lane, and by the time you were actually, maybe you try to kill a hero or something, maybe you did kill that hero, and then you're going for the tower push, you're only operating on maybe like 15 seconds window still for Death Pact. So now I feel like there's a lot larger of a window to work with this Death Pact on Clinks, and the less creeps you're eating, I don't know how I feel about that, but I still think this is a buff for Clinks. I don't think he's reliant on just sitting in jungle the whole entire time, eating creeps at level 18, you know, when you have this 15-second cooldown. Battery Assault, level 20, again, increasing the longevity of the impact of some of these more early to mid-game heroes like Chen. Clockwork falls under a very similar timeline of the game, and his effectiveness, he starts dropping off past like 40 minutes, and usually level 20 is in the area. Now you have plus 40 battery assault damage on top of the fact that you can always have battery assault on as soon as you get to level 25. From my experience, though, the game is usually over, or it's at least very close to being over if you do get to level 20. Maybe you've already lost the game and you can't actually have that big impact, or you've dominated the game enough that that it's already over. But it does help. It does help in these closer games that somehow draw out. Freezing Field, plus 50 damage. Also, you have the Ganim Scepter and all these sorts of things. So, Crystamine, she's definitely still going to be in the meta, I think, for sure, thanks to the prevalence of the jungle. Ganim Scepter and AoE Shallow Grave. People don't realize it, but 450 is pretty big. When I first saw AoE Shallow Grave, I was like, who the hell cares? I was like, that I would much prefer the Aghanims upgrade onto Weave. I think I still would prefer it, but the 450 AoE spell is a very long, or very, very big AoE. It's like slightly bigger than Chronosphere, I think. So you're talking about a pretty big AoE, and you're talking about a pretty long duration spell, you know, going on for 5 seconds. So it's possible that this could be a decent late game item for Dazzle, despite it initially sounding like garbage. You know, I thought I was, know, first thing I thought, I was like, that sounds like garbage. I'd rather have a weave. But I don't know. It could be more viable than you initially think. Doom has a lot more camps to be able to work off of. And now his mana cost, which is really hard to work around in the laning phase, he got some forgiveness here. He now is at 40 mana cost at level 1, which is huge for Doom. Even though it did come at the cost of a little bit of... oh, I'm sorry. I actually read this wrong the first time. Rescaled from 1020 30 40 to 16 24 32 40. So a little bit of buff on both sides. More camps to work off of is still good for Doom. Pushing, I think, is beneficial to Doom because pushing naturally leads to split pushing. If you can't actually defend, then you try and split push, and Doom is good at both. Because the aura he gives, he's good for being able to push into towers, take objectives, force fights, and then the split push is countered by his ganking potential of Doom. Still think Doom is just not a good enough ability. Kind of needs a buff there, but everything else about Doom is looking better all the time. Replace respawn talent. This is the one support that really got a huge buff. Geomagnetic grip targets allies. The change of a respawn talent and taking that minus death timer away and turning it into geomagnetic grip targets allies. The Aghanim's upgrade. That's a big buff to Earth Spirit's late game, but he kind of needed it considering how poor his laning phase is in comparison to Monkey King and Treant Protector. Earthshaker is coming back to the meta, I believe. Combination of the offlaner needing more laning phase suicidal type offlaners that are able to play the suicide lane very well and do things with creep equilibrium to get themselves secured farm without dying a whole lot. I think that's very valuable. So when you change True Strike and 350, that's just kind of like a small bonus. Astral Spirit, small little thing added to Elder Titan. Enchantress. I think for the most part, in most ganking scenarios, you would prefer to have this change for Enchant, which is this low duration is decreased from the 5.5 seconds that you had to now 2.25, and it scales upwards. But the Enchant slow is a standard 55%, so it's a lot more impactful for that small window. For Enchantress herself and her creeps, the longer duration can be better because you sit there right-clicking and right-clicking and right-clicking with all these things over a wide period of time. But when it comes to actually ganking for an ally, especially melee heroes, they get a lot more value out of a very hard slow over a shorter duration rather than a weak slow over a longer duration. So I think that it did receive quite a bit. Combined with everything else. Again, everything else, even this, fantastic. Increase in damage, more late game viability. Balthus instance added to Enigma, cool. Time dilation 10% to 14%, considering this is per affected cooldown. You get up to 4 on a hero. We could have some very, very slow people thanks to time dilation. Slight little buffs to some of the heroes that just haven't worked out in the meta so far. Gyrocopter, Huskar. Io got his tether stun back at level 25. Again, it's level 25. It's not worth talking about. Same thing here. Oh, Jakiro, cool. Yo, pierces immunity. It's level 25. You still have to get to level 25 to have this change mean anything. And these heroes, they're not about... oh, wait till we get level 25, guys. That's when the game turns around. No, they're about securing the laning phase and winning mid-game. That's what these heroes are about. These are just cherries. Ghost Ship. Oh, that's a huge change for Kunkka. Good lord. Every single noob, Kunkka noob, knows the feeling of trying to work around this really clunky fucking mechanic where you have to be at a certain distance back to throw the ghost ship to actually land on the hero you wanted to. Now you can actually be right there in the face of things. You can actually be on the front line, right-clicking a hero when you've got an X marks a spot and torrented. You can actually do some physical damage with this hero rather than sitting like a pussy way in the back and going, doom, 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 doom. Oh, I'm going to throw my little torrent. Oh, throw my fish, pull him back in. Yeah, fuck that. Now you can actually do something with your Kunkka, you know? Yeah, like this is supposed to be a strength support that has this really cool utility kit, but you can't even use your strength to be on the front lines. So now you actually can with Ghost Ship. Cool beans. It also makes this hero, because of the fact that it had to always be on the front lines, because if you got initiated on, it was really hard to work with Kunkka and reaction. Now, Kunkka is still bad reacting to a gank, but he's a lot better thanks to Ghost Ship not having this clunky mechanic that you have to work around. So, great buff to Kunkka. Great buff, honestly. I may start actually playing this hero. Legion Commander, I've been spamming this a lot because I've been kind of learning the hero. Dual Scepter now gets spell immunity during your duel, so it means you can't be disabled and stuff when you've got that one-on-one with the Ags. Still, the one-on-one with the Ags, it's like, it can be too detrimental. So it's still a hard thing to ever pick up. There's very rare games where I think, oh, this is an Ganim Scepter game for Legion Commander. Bit of a hurt to the overwhelming odds cost having a mana scaling now, particularly since you don't have a shrine to work off of. The shrine is what affects Legion Commander the most. We have an Ganim Scepter that, while Pulse Nova is active every 1.75 seconds, Lightning Storm will hit one random unit within a 750 AoE. Prioritizes heroes. I don't know. I think that, you know, pushing could be more of a thing in this patch, and as a result, you may see more Leshrac mids. It's kind of a lane dominator, right? I don't know. I don't know how to swing it. For many of these magic damage mids, it's hard to gauge because of the deny and how that affects things. For a lot of these melee strength and agility heroes, they have an easier time getting denies than the intelligence range heroes. So, you know, that does affect them in some ways. It is a slight nerf that you have to consider in contrast to the buffs that you got. Lich power creep. Whatever. We didn't even get the respawn talent half the time for Lena, so we don't really care that much. Lone Druid. Things are happening, and who knows? Maybe Bear Druid comes back into play. There's so many talents to work with. 50% Spirit Bear magic resistance, as well as the armor that you get for one of the talents. You know, you could actually, based on the game, argue that maybe the Lone Druid Bear is back into play. Kind of doubt it. Oh yeah. Lycan has been rising back in the meta quite a bit, and while you don't see any direct buffs to him, besides this respawn talent into 12 feral HP regen, while you don't see anything past that, I do think that Howl has become such an amazing ability, and there is more value to having a high ground pusher that is... You always wanted tower hitters in the game, but now having a tower hitter that can go high ground at 30 minutes as opposed to 45, 50, I think has more value from all the things that we've talked about. So Lycan, think he was already a pretty strong hero in the last patch, and I think he just kind of keeps on trucking along. Weird Ganim Scepter for upgrade for Magnus. Instead of the AoE aura thing, you now have a shockwave that comes back and applies a slow. I mean, it's not why you pick the heroes, so. Also, there's a bug with the 500 skewer range where you always do an extra 500 skewer range, which is obviously a nerf, so. Mystic Snake and Ganim Scepter, where your Ganim Scepter upgrade, where your Mystic Snake turns enemies into stone for 1 second. I presume that also applies the increase in physical damage. Increases by 0.2 seconds per bounce. The bounce is kind of whatever. The 1 second and it being able to bounce to allies and stuff is kind of cool. And Ganim Scepter, all of the stats are very beneficial to the Medusa. So I'm not gonna say that this won't be picked up. It could become a core item to the Medusa. The actual active of the Medusa with this Mystic Snake is kind of cool. It gives her a stun to be able to work off of. It's because of the stat increase, these heroes go on you, and if you do get Mystic Snake off, it becomes quite impactful, because not only you getting the mana back into yourself, but also you're stunning these heroes. It really could be a like a first or second item for Medusa, or it could be like a 5th value item. Like, if, you know, hard to tell. But my money's on it actually becoming a thing for Medusa. I also think Medusa is still quite strong in this patch. Little buffs to Mirana. She's an awkward hero right now. She's a magic damage dealer when you want a lot of physical damage out of most of her heroes. She's not quite a lane dominator, though the base damage sneaking upwards does help. Monkey King got neutered. Oh, he got neutered so hard, and I love it. Oh, it makes me feel so good. Fuck you, Fogged. Fog spammed Monkey King a bunch in solo queue. That dirty, disgusting whore. So, Wukong's command no longer gives you bonus damage, and instead it gives you bonus armor, so increases your survivability. But the big thing is, Wukong's command army no longer copy Basher Abyssal. Oh, thank God. Getting perma-bashed by these dumbass stone things is the dumbest thing in Dota. In turn, you do get some buffs to the Wukong's command, trying to give it a little bit more damage and increase your survivability, blah, blah, blah. But the power spike of Wukong's command, when you get that Basher, oh, it was insane. It was like, all right, we win fights as long as the fight is anywhere around Wukong's command. Like, as long as we're not initiated on and 2 heroes are lost before Wukong's command goes out. Like, as long as we're doing some initiation of our own, then we kind of win the fight because of this Basher. Seong A Siren got a I would say pretty hefty nerf. 180 second cooldown to 160 at level 1. Doesn't matter because this hero is AFK farming anyway, so that 20 second window, I don't think it really impacts this much. But this 20 second window, because the Naga Siren does get to level 18 pretty quickly, and the Seong A Siren is a nuisance for the rest of the game for you, this 20 second window is a lot more significant. You can't use this as a defense mechanism as often for the Naga Siren, and does mean that ganking the Naga Siren and actively ganking the Naga Siren over and over again is more valuable, more incentive there. They rescaled the range, whatever. Again, like, you can nerf the level 1, but most of the time I don't really care about level 1 as Naga Siren because I level up pretty quickly. Remove teleportation cooldown. Whatever. 75% heal amplification. A little buff to Necrophos. A little buff to Night Stalker, who can now fly at night. Flying movement for 2 seconds. I mean, I'm down. I think offlane Night Stalker, again, I think playing the Vision game is going to be pretty important for this next patch. Night Stalker is one of the best. Limiting the enemy's vision with making it nighttime and having an Ganim Scepter plus a gem that take out a bunch of wards. Allowing him to be able to have an escape mechanism now as an offlaner, because that's the way I see this as an escape mechanism for you to be able to jump into trees during nighttime. Obviously, there are some other benefits, but I think that's the biggest one is like, oh, I can now go fly over cliffs and stuff at nighttime, and that's awesome. Fortune's End is now a root. It's good. It's a good change to Oracle. Still has mana problems. But I think saving heroes, defensive, like saving style heroes like Dazzle and Oracle are valuable for mid-game pushes to high ground. So that in turn is a slight meta buff to Oracle if we follow the line of logic that we've been operating this whole entire time. An Ags that gives OD to Astral Imprisonments, that's entirely possible. It's a thing. Phantom Lancer, a little bit of a power creep as well here. I think the hero was actually becoming viable, and these power creeps, they might tip him over the edge. Replace respawn talent. I like this one. The 20% XP gain combined with the fact that I think Phoenix is one of the better Midas heroes in the game, particularly since we did have a backup to the experience increase gained out of Midas. Phoenix has some pretty valuable talents in the late game, as well as getting to level 12 and level 18 are incredibly important for Phoenix. It's also one of the best Ags upgrades you can get from a utility hero. So in that case, like all those things say Midas to me, right? There's no one item that you really need early on for a Phoenix. You know, none of the items are really going to change. You just need levels, and eventually you're going to need your late game items and late game levels. So Hand of Midas is, I think, will just kind of be always seen on Phoenix. So that respawn talent is actually very valuable, being taken away and adding 20% XP gain instead. Pugna had a really big problem with getting kited by vision, losing his life drain every single time. So then they have it, so it gains, it gives you true sight vision over the target. But in return, they reduce the cast range significantly, making it a base 800. But it does come with a 100 range break buffer. So meaning it now you could apply it at 800, but it breaks at 900. So you at least it can't be instantly taken out. And on top of the fact that you're looking at Ether Lens and you're looking at cast range talents increases anyway, you know, I would consider this a buff. I think the early mid game was too hard for Pugna to have consistent impacts when all a hero had to do was just boop, loop into the vision, and all of a sudden you lost your life drain. That sucked. So I think that will help a lot. From a 4 position, potential 2 position, depends. I don't think the pushing meta is like we're back to TI4 or anything like that. So I don't know if Pugna core is a thing, and it's hard to fit him in as a support. Hey, does anybody know about this one? The level 25 talent, no Shadow Strike cooldown to 550 AoE Shadow Strike. Does that mean it's like an AoE that you just like a circle that you throw, or is it more like Scream of Pain where it's just an AoE around you? I didn't bother to look it up because I didn't think it mattered that much. Eye of the Storm prioritizes striking static link heroes, helps quite a bit for Razor if we get more mid game focused. It's like Scream of Pain. Okay, I kind of thought it was that way. That's cool, I guess. I don't know. Again, level 25, not really why you pick the hero unless you're talking about the old level 25 where you're getting this stupid 100% spell lifesteal thingy from Blade Mail. But it is a lane dominator. So it's a lane dominator with burst damage. High tempo hero. What happened? I lost my... small little changes, more TPS out of Sandstorm, whatever. I mean, this kind of sucks. The 0.9 invisibility out of your level 1 value of Sandstorm. That kind of sucks. You really liked having that extra invis, but more of a slight nerf than a slight buff. Respawn talent turned into at level 25 minus 1.5 seconds of Shadow Poison cooldown. Again, not why you picked a hero. I don't know why Shadow Shaman got a buff, but he did. I thought Shadow Shaman was actually in a pretty good place. I thought the hero was actually very viable. And all of a sudden, we have increased base damage by 6. Again. And increased the Serpent Ward's range by 50. And instead of a respawn talent, he has 4 wards summoned, which I would probably take anyway. I don't see a whole lot of value in Shadow Shaman having a respawn talent when me using my wards and you know, getting off that 1 disable or 2 disables before I die, you know, the wards is the impact there for my fight after the disables. So I'm down with this. You know, a lot more offensive power out of Shadow Shaman with this 4 ward summoned combined with an incredible laning phase. Like, this hero is insanely strong. Shackle is an incredible damage ability. Not like it's incredible disable, but it's also an incredible damage ability. It actually beats out almost every single other ability for its level when it comes to damage. It's insane. It's like all these other level 1 abilities. I'm gonna look it up real quick. Here, Rasta Shadow Shaman Dota 2. I think people like all the time overlook the damage that Shackles does. So level 1, it does the hell am I looking at here? 2.75 and 44. I don't know why they just give me the max damage. It's like 120 damage or something like that, right? So the damage is really good. The disable time is really good. Now his right clicks are beating out almost every single hero. And then you now have a little bit of buffs to Serpent Wards as well. All really good for Shadow Shaman, particularly if pushing is better. Haunt. 180-second cooldown for Spectre. Oh, God. Spectre just got hit in the balls. That sucks. That hurts Spectre quite a bit. But we'll see. Spectre is still one of the most valuable carries to have in late game. So nerfing her early game a bit, I do not mind all that much. It's like Spectre was too impactful early game for a late game carry. So God's Strength now grants strength when activated, and then in return we have a little bit of a attack bonus reduction. This is kind of interesting because it does mean that God's Strength now makes you tankier, as well as giving you this big buff in damage. It's kind of cool, combined, because you have to consider that this increase in strength means an increase in HP when you're already working off of a very high amount of armor. So if this magic damage they don't have enough magic damage to be able to bring you down, or even better, you have a BKB, and you also have this War Cry, which is buffing the hell out of your armor, and then you're also getting this increase in HP thanks to God's Strength giving you extra strength, then you just are becoming this unstoppable menace when you use this combination of abilities. So I think Sven is definitely back in the meta because we have a combination of things. Slight buffs here. We have the fact that the camps respawn every single minute. There's a lot more camps to be able to work off of too, and Sven is really good at being able to clear through those efficiently without actually losing any or very little HP while clearing through them. So he can clear through stacks. He can just clear through regular camps one by one, no problem. he fits into our idea of controlling the map better and trying to push for high ground. Like, Sven is one of the better high ground pushers in the game. He's one of the more unstoppable heroes that runs at your tower and you're like, oh god, what do we do? He's Warcry, he's BKB, he's laying into this tower like a madman. Mask of Madness got some buffs. He's also one of the better Mask of Madness heroes. Again, you snowball all these things together, meta changes, buffs to certain items, buff to the actual hero itself, you know, changes to the jungle, and some of these heroes see very large buffs. And I think Sven is one of them, despite only having 2 lines. Grow increases craggy exterior chance by 6, 8, 10%. That's just a straight up buff out of nowhere. Craggy exterior just got a whole lot more annoying. Fantastic. Treant Protector now applies a root rather than a bash. Excellent, because Treant Protector has been real annoying, and having that slight workaround does help. Still think Treant Protector and his lating phase combination of being invis and having all this damage, combined with the impact that Living Armor has for your lating phase, as well as being able to protect your towers and give you a mechanic that no other hero does, Treant Protector is still going to be quite value, as is Tusk. It's a workaround just like the Kunkka. Now the Ice Shards, where you point it at, is actually where the blockers start, rather than just being this vague, this is the center of your half circle of shards. So there's going to be a lot more accuracy to using Ice Shards. And I think Tusk was already beginning to see his place in the meta as a valuable 4 position, alongside Tree and Riki and all those other heroes. Not sure if Underlord's ever coming back, but it could in this patch. He's got an Aghanim's upgrade, which gives Atrophy Aura's bonus damage, half of it to allied heroes. And the bonus damage also lasts longer, so you don't have that heavy drop-off that happens sometimes from the Atrophy Aura when you haven't killed creeps in a while. So you can actually go into these pushes with a lot of extra damage. You get Guardian Greaves. Maybe you get Ganim Scepter after that. It could be one of the more core items. It was one of the Ganim Scepters that was introduced in 7.06 that I looked at and I said, this fits the hero's kind of power spikes, and it fits his idea. Like, he just tanks up a little bit more with the Ganim Scepter as well. It fits all of that pretty well. Why not? I think it could be arguably the most core Ganim Scepter that's been introduced. I think Medusa might give it a run, but we'll see. Health regeneration. We talked about health regeneration, right? How HP regen kind of covers for some of these shrines. I think Ice Frog still wants heroes to be fighting a lot, if possible. That is a big one, though. 15 HP regeneration. That's a lot of HP regeneration for a level 10 talent. Slight little changes. Nothing major from all of this. Grave Chill duration increased. So just a straight up buff for a hero that was, I think it was already pretty viable. The Solar Crest does affect him, but we already talked about how Solar Crest is already it's such a stat efficient item that it's not going to go away. And a hero like Visage didn't really care about the change to the 25% True Strike versus miss percentage chance, because a lot of times he's throwing this Solar Crest and this the familiars at a hero, and that hero's not actually hitting the Visage itself. So he doesn't really care if that hero is no longer missing. And if anything, it's going to be a buff thanks to now having a True Strike against evasion heroes, such as PA or heroes with Butterfly. Those evasion heroes, you basically got to look at it. It's like maybe it's like a 11% increase in being able to hit a hero. I think something like that. If you have like 75% hit chance and then you get a 25% true strike. I think it's something like that. I don't know. Talk to a math guy, you know. Wind Ranger talents are weird. Wind Run grants invisibility. I still think that this hero, you're only going to be seeing this hero as a 4 position with the 120 power shot damage and 30% cooldown reduction. She can be very very impactful. As a magic damage dealer with reliable shackles, if you're a good player like that. Mid lane, I'm still not sure about her damage from the get-go, but True Strike to Death Ward, cool for the Ganim Scepter. Yeah, I don't think the rest of these really matter too much. As a whole, I mean, I think we already talked about pretty heavily about where I at least am kind of theory crafting this patch going. A lot more focus on the laning phase, a little bit more focus on pushing, and if you do push, a lot more focus on going high ground earlier because it's more impactful and it's not nearly as hard. It's still difficult with that shrine, but it's a lot more impactful being able to force that shrine usage as well as force buybacks. So I think the incentives are there for the real strong tower hitters like Sven and Lycan. I still see a bit of a focus on physical damage just because Solar Crest is not going to go away with the change that happened. I still think Solar Crest is going to be such a stat efficient item that we'll continue to see it, just maybe not the full 3 Solar Crests on a team or something like that, you know. Siege creeps and the economy changes as well. I think the jungle change is probably one of the biggest ones. The jungle change in every minute. We'll have to play out the meta. We'll probably talk about it. I'll try and make another video after I'm going to go to Star Ladder and another tournament after that. So after that kind of circuit that we're going to run through where we've got Star Ladder, Manila Masters, Summit, somewhere in there we'll create a video and talk about what actually played out, because nobody's smart enough to look at these changes and correctly theory craft everything that's going to be changing about the meta, because it is an ebb and flow of many things. So we'll talk about after the pro games happen and we see a lot of this new patch fully played out. We'll do another video talking and going. We'll go back through the patch log changes and we'll see the meta change, and then we'll be able to identify what were the changes that were actually really impactful. Maybe there's a change that I kind of poo-pooed and just said, oh, that's kind of whatever, but it was actually very very big change to a hero or to the state of the game. So that's it for the patch analysis. I hope you enjoyed it for 7.06. I am going to play some Dota now. So if you want to watch me continue my losing spree, I mean, it's a new patch, right? It's a new patch. A new dawn, a new day. But yeah, if you want to watch that, you could stick around. If not, get the fuck out.